Pearl Harbor is a day that will forever be remembered as one of America's darkest days. On December 7, 1941, Japan had attacked the island of Oahu and destroyed Pearl Harbor, a naval base located there. This attack was due to years of failed compromises which then led to a conflict. Here are some factors which led to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. One huge factor was that Japan was becoming an expanding nation and it needed resources, which led to Japan invading places like the Philippines for resources such as oil, rubber, and metal. When this happened, America was angered, but took no military action. Continuing on with the invasion, Japan invaded the Chinese town of Manchuria and other parts of northern and southern China. At this time, America and China were good allies in the Pacific. When Japan had attacked, this made America furious, but still America's military took no action. Another key factor was America had frozen Japan's American assets and closed the Panama Canal. This was due to Japan conquering parts of Asia and Pacific Islands. After this, Japan had felt like this was the last straw. The last and final factor to the madness was as the American Navy began to grow, Japan had seen them as a threat. This was all happening at the beginning of World War II, and Japan thought if they could become the strongest navy in the Pacific, America wouldn't be a threat in World War II. So now let's talk about the planning of the attack. Planning had been underway for some time on an attack on the southern resource area to add it to the greater East Asia Cove prosperity sphere Japan envisioned in the Pacific. The Philippine Islands, at the time an American territory, were also a Japanese target. The Japanese military concluded an invasion of the Philippines would provoke an American military response. Rather than seize and fortify the islands and wait for the inevitable U.S. counterattack, Japan's military leaders instead decided on the Pearl Harbor attack, which they assumed would negate the American forces needed for the liberation and reconquest of the islands. Planning for the attack on Pearl Harbor officially begun in very early 1941 by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He finally won the approval to attack from the Naval High Command by threatening to resign from his position. The attack was approved in the summer at an imperial conference and again at a second conference in the fall. Several times throughout the year, pilots were trained and ships were prepared for its execution. Authority for the attack was granted at the Second Imperial Conference if a diplomatic result satisfactory to Japan was not reached. After the final approval from Emperor Hirohito, the order to attack was issued at the beginning of December. A key part of the Japanese plan for attack included breaking off several negotiations with the United States, some happening only 30 minutes before the attack began. Diplomats from the Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C., including the Japanese ambassador Admiral Kichisaburo Nomura and Representative Saburo Kurusu, had been conducting extended talks with the State Department regarding the U.S. reactions to the Japanese move into French Indochina that summer. It is now time for the attack. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise military strike by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service against the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii Territory. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the attack, also known as the Battle of Pearl Harbor, led to the United States' entry into World War II. The Japanese military leadership referred to the attack as the Hawaii Operation and Operation AI, and as Operation Z during its planning. The attack commenced at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time. The base was attacked by 353 Imperial Japanese aircraft, including fighters, level and dive bombers, and torpedo bombers, in 2 waves, launched from 6 aircraft carriers. All 8 U.S. Navy battleships were damaged, with 4 sunk. All but the USS Arizona were later raised and 6 were returned to service and went on to fight in the war. The Japanese also sank or damaged 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, an anti-aircraft training ship, and 1 mine layer. 188 U.S. aircrafts were destroyed, 2,403 Americans were killed, and 1,178 others were wounded. Japanese losses were light. 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines lost, 64 servicemen killed, and only one Japanese sailor, Kazuo Sakamaki, were captured. At the time of the attack, in the early afternoon of December 7, 1941, Franklin D. Roosevelt was just finishing lunch in his Oval Study on the second floor of the White House, preparing to work on his stamp album when his telephone rang. The White House operator announced that Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox was on the line and insisted on talking with him. Roosevelt took the call. The Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii just before 8 a.m. Hawaii time. Secretary Knox told the president, Harry Hopkins, a top aide who was with Roosevelt at the time, could not believe the report, but Roosevelt did. It was just the kind of unexpected thing the Japanese would do. At the very time they were discussing peace in the Pacific, they were plotting to overthrow it, he said. For the rest of that afternoon, 60 years ago, Roosevelt and his advisors were busy at the White House receiving fragmentary reports about the damage to U.S. installations, ships, and planes in Hawaii. Security was increased around the White House and plans for a bomb shelter for the president underneath the nearby Treasury Department building were underway. Across the nation, news of the attack spread by radio and word of mouth, and Americans began thinking about what life in a nation at war was going to be like.